The airport buzzed with the usual noise of rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, and conversations blending together. People hurried from gate to gate, some excited, some tired, some dragging themselves through long layovers. But among them was Daniel Harris, a quiet black man in his late 30s, walking with calm, steady steps toward gate B-17. He wasn't in a rush. He didn't like attention. He only wanted to get home. Daniel carried a plain black backpack, nothing fancy. His clothes were simple: clean jeans, a soft gray shirt, and an old jacket he'd had for years. Nothing about him looked expensive, loud, or worthy of notice. And Daniel preferred it that way. When the boarding announcement came, "First-class passengers may now board," Daniel stepped forward politely with the group. No pushing. No showing off. Just stepping into line like everyone else. He smiled at the flight attendant who scanned his ticket. She returned the smile warmly. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Harris," she said. He nodded with quiet appreciation, then walked into the jet bridge. Inside the plane, the first-class cabin glowed softly with warm lights. Cushioned seats, wide legroom, and neatly placed water bottles waited for the passengers. Daniel found his seat, 1A by the window. He placed his backpack under the seat and sat down, adjusting his jacket and taking a deep breath. He loved window seats. They made him feel calm. But calm didn't last long. A few rows behind him, a white woman named Linda Porter entered first class with loud steps and an even louder sigh. She wore expensive clothes, carried a designer purse, and gripped her phone like her life depended on it. She walked down the aisle, scanning the faces already seated, judging every stranger in her path. And then she saw Daniel. Her face changed instantly. Her eyebrows shot up. Her lips tightened. She paused in the aisle and stared at him as if she'd witnessed something unbelievable. There, in the first-class cabin, was a black man, dressed simply, sitting quietly in a window seat. Her thoughts started racing, fueled not by logic but by prejudice. What is he doing here? He doesn't look like he belongs in first class. Did he sneak in? Did he upgrade himself? Her expression shifted from surprise to irritation. She continued walking to her seat, 1C, right next to Daniel. She stopped beside him, standing over him, waiting for something. Maybe for him to explain himself. Maybe for him to move. Maybe for him to apologize for existing where she didn't expect him. But Daniel just sat there quietly, staring out the window, unaware of her burning stare. Linda cleared her throat loudly. Daniel turned politely. "Excuse me, am I in your way?" "No," she replied sharply. "Not yet." He blinked, unsure what she meant, but kept his tone calm. "Let me move for you." He stood up slightly so she could access her seat. She sat down with a dramatic sigh, frowning as if forced to endure some injustice. She kept glancing at Daniel, her annoyance growing every minute. After a moment, she reached for the call button. Daniel noticed the sudden movement but didn't react. He simply hoped she wasn't causing trouble. A flight attendant walked over with a warm smile. "Yes, ma'am? How can I help you?" Linda pointed a finger toward Daniel, right at his face. "This man," she said loudly, "I think he's in the wrong seat." The cabin grew quiet. The few passengers already seated turned their heads. Daniel stiffened slightly but kept his voice even. "My ticket is for 1A, he said respectfully. "I can show you." Linda scoffed. "Oh, please. You don't need to pretend. First class is expensive. People don't just accidentally sit here." The flight attendant kept her tone calm. "Ma'am, everyone in this section has a valid ticket." Linda wasn't convinced. "Well, double-check. He probably switched seats when no one was looking." Daniel exhaled slowly, staying composed. He didn't want conflict. He didn't want drama. But her words stung, not because she doubted his seat but because she doubted his right to be there at all. The flight attendant looked at Daniel apologetically. "Sir, can I see your ticket again? Just to confirm." "Of course," Daniel said calmly. He pulled out his phone, opened his digital boarding pass and held it up. The flight attendant scanned it. A soft beep confirmed it. "Seat 1A, she said. "Exactly where he is supposed to be." But instead of apologizing, instead of calming down, Linda leaned back with crossed arms. "Well," she said with a tight smirk, "that doesn't mean he belongs here." Those words hit the cabin like ice water. Daniel didn't respond. He looked out the window again, focusing on his breathing. He'd dealt with this type of attitude before. It wasn't new, but it always stung. The flight attendant forced a polite smile. "Ma'am, if you need anything else." "Oh, I will," Linda snapped. "Because I'm not sitting next to someone who isn't from here." Several passengers frowned. Someone muttered under their breath. But no one confronted her directly. Daniel lowered his gaze. He felt the sting of her words, but he swallowed it quietly. The plane hadn't even taken off yet, and the trouble had begun. Linda didn't know who Daniel was. She didn't know his story. She didn't know his past. She didn't know the weight he carried. She didn't know the honor behind his name. But soon, very soon, she would. And everyone on that plane would witness a moment they would remember forever. The flight attendant walked away slowly, trying not to look frustrated, but Linda was far from done. She kept shifting loudly in her seat, huffing, sighing, and glancing at Daniel like he was a problem she was forced to deal with. Daniel kept his eyes on the window, pretending he couldn't hear her, but every sharp breath she took pressed on his nerves. He had been through worse in his life, but somehow the quiet humiliation of being judged by a stranger still cut deep. He tried to calm himself. Just breathe. Let it go. But Linda was determined to make it impossible. Unbelievable, she muttered loudly enough for half the cabin to hear. People sneaking into first class like it's free seating. Daniel's fingers tightened around the armrest, but he said nothing. A man 2 rows behind them leaned forward. He looked at Daniel, then at Linda, then back at Daniel again. His expression softened with understanding. He whispered to his wife, "Leave him alone," but too quietly for Linda to hear. Another flight attendant passed through the aisle checking seatbelts. Linda reached out her arm dramatically. "Excuse me. Can someone please do something about this?" She pointed again at Daniel as if pointing at a hazard. The attendant stopped, her polite expression beginning to crack. "Ma'am, he is in the correct seat." "That's not what I'm saying," Linda fired back. "I'm saying he doesn't fit here." The passenger in 2A muttered, "Wow," under his breath. Daniel finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, I'm just sitting in the seat I paid for. I'm not bothering you." Linda laughed, loud and sharp. "Paid for? You expect me to believe that?" Daniel met her eyes. His gaze wasn't angry, it was tired. Heavy. Worn from years of people like her assuming things they didn't know. "I do," he replied. Linda rolled her eyes. "Well, I don't." Another passenger turned around. "Lady, let him be. He's not doing anything." Linda's mouth opened, offended. "Are you kidding me? I have the right to feel safe." Daniel blinked slowly. "Safe? From me?" he asked softly. Linda hesitated. She hadn't expected him to talk back. "Yes. You're making me uncomfortable." Several passengers exchanged looks of disbelief. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "What? Because of the color of my skin? Or the simplicity of my clothes?" Linda stiffened. Her face went red. "Don't twist my words. I'm just saying it's suspicious that you're in first class." Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't lose control. Instead, he said something that made the entire row silent. "You judged me before I said a single word." That truth hit her harder than anything else he could have said. For a moment she had no reply. But embarrassment turned quickly into anger. "Well," she snapped, "I'm going to make sure the captain hears about this." Daniel calmly put on his seatbelt. "Go ahead." Linda waved down a flight attendant again. "Get the captain. Now." The attendant swallowed a sigh. "Let me see what I can do." Linda sat back triumphantly. "Good. Finally." Daniel looked out the window again, but inside he felt a familiar sting, one he had learned to live with. He wondered how many times in his life he had been forced to prove himself, to defend his existence. Too many times. Minutes passed. Passengers whispered. People checked their phones, pretending not to stare. Then a soft chime sounded. The cockpit door opened. And the captain stepped out. Tall, confident, calm. A man who had flown thousands of flights and handled dozens of emergencies. He walked down the aisle toward first class. Linda straightened her posture proudly. "Captain, thank you for coming. I have a complaint." The captain didn't slow down. He didn't look at her. He walked right past her without a single glance. Linda blinked. Captain? Captain. I said I have a complaint." But he still didn't look at her. Instead, he walked directly to Daniel's seat. Passengers held their breath. Linda's smile faded slowly, confusion washing over her face. And then the captain did something that made the entire cabin freeze in shock. He placed a respectful hand on Daniel's shoulder and said, "Sir, it's truly an honor to have you on board again." Linda's jaw dropped. Passengers stared. And Daniel finally looked up, meeting the eyes of the man who knew exactly who he was. The moment of truth was here. The entire first-class cabin froze. Every pair of eyes turned toward Daniel and the captain standing beside him. Even the humming of the engine seemed to quiet down. No one breathed. No one blinked. And Linda, she sat there stiff as a statue, her mouth slightly open, trying to understand what she was seeing. Daniel looked up slowly, surprised. He hadn't expected the captain to recognize him. Not after so many years, not in a crowded plane, not during a moment like this. His eyebrows lifted as he stood politely. "Captain Reynolds?" Daniel asked, voice soft but respectful. The captain smiled warmly. "It's been a long time, Sergeant Harris." A ripple of shock moved through the cabin. "Sergeant? Sergeant Harris?" Passengers exchanged confused whispers. Linda's eyes widened. Something inside her stomach twisted sharply. Daniel cleared his throat. "I didn't realize you'd still be flying." "Oh, I still take the skies every chance I get," Captain Reynolds said. "Not many men like you out there anymore." He placed a hand over his heart in a small gesture of respect. Linda blinked, confused. "Wait, Sergeant? Sergeant of what?" The captain turned to her with a neutral expression. "Sergeant Harris served in the military. He saved lives, including mine." A loud gasp burst from somewhere behind them. Even the flight attendants froze. Linda's face drained of color. The captain continued speaking, his voice calm but full of admiration. "Years ago, during a rescue mission overseas, our helicopter went down. There were injuries, gunfire, chaos, and only one man kept every single soldier alive until help arrived." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "That man," the captain said, placing a gentle hand on Daniel's shoulder again, "is sitting right beside you." The silence exploded into whispers. "No way. He saved a whole team? That's incredible. I think I heard about that story." But Linda felt heat rush to her face. Her heart hammered. She tried to find the words, but none came out. Her earlier insults replayed in her mind like a cruel echo. "He doesn't belong here. He doesn't fit here. He probably sneaked in." Now every word felt poisonous. Daniel stood there calmly, almost painfully humble, as if he would rather disappear than be praised. He swallowed and said softly, "Captain? I was just doing my duty." The captain shook his head gently. "You went far beyond duty. You risked your life to pull us out of that crash. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be flying today." Linda's throat tightened. She wanted to sink into her seat and vanish. The captain looked around the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you're sitting in first class today, you're sitting with a hero." Suddenly, a man in row 2 stood up. He extended his hand toward Daniel. "Sir, thank you for your service." Daniel hesitated, then shook it with a humble nod. A woman across the aisle stood next. "Thank you." Then another. And another. Seats creaked. People rose slowly. In moments, half the first-class cabin stood up, not because they were told to, not because they were forced, but because they wanted to. Their gratitude filled the space like warm light. Linda sat frozen as everyone around her honored the man she had insulted. The man she tried to belittle. The man she assumed didn't belong. She lowered her gaze, her cheeks burning, her hands shaking slightly. Shame pressed down on her like a heavy weight. The captain gave Daniel a respectful nod. "If there's anything you need during this flight, you let me know personally." Daniel nodded. "Thank you. But I'm fine." The captain smiled and returned to the cockpit. When Daniel sat down again, the woman in 2B leaned forward and whispered, "Don't let that lady bother you. You earned your seat." Daniel offered a small smile. "Thank you." Finally, Linda found her voice. It came out thin and trembling. I didn't know." Daniel looked at her gently. Not angry. Not proud. Just tired. "That's the problem," he said quietly. "You judged me before you knew anything." Linda's eyes watered. I'm sorry." Daniel didn't reply. Not because he was cruel. Because there was nothing left to say. The rest of the cabin watched silently as the woman who complained sat humbled, staring at her hands, unable to lift her head. And when the plane finally prepared for takeoff, one thing was clear. Respect had risen. Ignorance had fallen. And Daniel Harris had shown the world what true dignity looked like. The plane's engines hummed as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, and the captain's announcement echoed softly through the speakers. But inside first class, no one was thinking about the flight. Everyone was still replaying the moment they witnessed, a whole row of passengers standing to honor the man Linda had tried to humiliate. Daniel adjusted his jacket quietly, trying to shrink back into himself, but the warmth of the passengers' gratitude still lingered around him. He wasn't used to the spotlight. He didn't like being the center of attention. For years he had lived a quiet life after leaving the military. He didn't brag. He didn't talk about his past. He didn't want to be a hero. He only wanted peace. And yet, the woman beside him had dragged him into the center of a drama he never asked for. Linda sat stiffly in her seat, staring straight ahead as if afraid to move. Her face was still red. Her hands clutched the armrests so tightly her knuckles were white. She kept replaying every insult she had thrown at Daniel, and every detail she had assumed. The humiliation tasted bitter. She wondered if anyone would forget. She would forget. But Daniel sat calmly as if nothing had happened. His silence made her guilt heavier. After a few minutes of awkward quiet, a flight attendant approached Daniel with a warm smile. "Mr. Harris, the captain asked if you'd like a complimentary upgrade meal. Anything you want? Drinks included." Daniel shook his head politely. "No, thank you. I'm fine." But the attendant insisted, lowering her voice. "Sir, you deserve it." He hesitated, then nodded gently. "All right. Just something simple." Linda's eyes flicked toward him, her jaw tightening with shame. She had mocked him for not belonging in first class, and now everyone on the plane was treating him with more respect than she had ever received. A man across the aisle leaned forward. "If the captain didn't survive that crash, I would have lost a good friend. You saved him." "Thank you." Daniel nodded. "I'm glad he made it home." The man continued, "You made sure a lot of men made it home." His wife next to him added, "And today you reminded us not to judge someone by their appearance." Linda's stomach twisted. She felt every word like a stone hitting her chest. As the plane lifted into the sky, Linda finally gathered the courage to speak. Her voice was soft, shaky, almost childlike. "Mr. Harris?" Daniel turned slowly. "Yes." She swallowed hard. I want to apologize. I was wrong." Daniel's eyes softened, not with pity but with quiet understanding. "You were." Her voice cracked. "I made assumptions. Ugly ones. I let my prejudice speak. I'm ashamed." Daniel didn't rush to comfort her. He didn't absolve her instantly. Instead he answered honestly. "You didn't just assume I didn't belong here," he said. "You assumed you knew my worth." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I know, and I'm so sorry." Daniel exhaled. "What matters is that you learn from it. Not for me, but for whoever sits next to you in the future." Linda nodded slowly. "I will." The passengers nearby pretended not to listen, but every ear was tuned in. They wanted to know how this moment would end. Would he forgive her? Reject her? Ignore her? Daniel didn't do any of those things. Instead, he simply said, "Let's just try to have a peaceful flight." Linda wiped her eyes quickly and whispered, "Thank you for your patience." Daniel nodded and returned his gaze to the window. The clouds below them stretched like cotton across the sky. Sunlight glowed softly on the wings. The world outside was peaceful, something Daniel wished the world inside could always be. But the moment wasn't over yet. Because as the plane cruised at altitude, the captain made another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we settle in, I want to take a moment to recognize a passenger who once saved an entire crew, including mine." The cabin went silent. Linda froze. Daniel's heart skipped. The captain continued, "Sergeant Harris, thank you, again, for your bravery and service." The entire first-class cabin erupted in applause. Some people clapped softly. Others clapped loudly. A few even stood again. Linda stayed seated, clapping with trembling hands, tears sliding down her cheeks. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't want attention, but he accepted the gratitude with quiet dignity. And as the applause echoed through the plane, Linda finally understood something she had never understood before. Respect is earned through character. Not wealth, not appearance, not skin color, not assumptions. And the man she had judged so harshly was the most honorable person she had ever sat beside. The applause faded slowly, leaving behind a warm hum in the cabin. Daniel felt every beat of it echo in his chest. Not because he wanted the praise, but because for once, people were seeing him for who he was, not for what someone assumed about him. But even in that moment of honor, Daniel stayed humble. He simply nodded to the passengers, offering a gentle, appreciative smile. Then he sat back in his seat, quietly hoping the rest of the flight would be calm. Linda sat frozen beside him, trying to disappear into her seat. Her hands shook and her breathing was uneven. She had never felt so small, so embarrassed, so wrong. Her earlier confidence was gone. Her arrogance had evaporated. She couldn't stop replaying the moment the captain walked right past her, honoring the man she had insulted. Finally, she whispered toward him, I don't know how you stayed so calm with me. Daniel didn't look at her. He kept his eyes forward. Because anger won't fix anything. But you had every right, she said, her voice trembling. Every right to be angry. Daniel exhaled slowly, his calmness almost painful. Anger only adds fuel. You already lit a fire. Her throat tightened and tears welled in her eyes again. She had judged him so quickly, so cruelly, and now she felt the full weight of her mistake pressing down on her like a stone. After a few minutes of silence, the flight attendant returned with Daniel's complimentary meal. She placed the tray gently in front of him but then leaned in slightly. Sir, if there's anything we can do to make this flight better, just let us know. Daniel nodded with quiet gratitude. Thank you. The attendant hesitated, glancing at Linda. Her expression softened slightly, not with sympathy but something closer to disappointment. And ma'am, she said carefully, I hope you also enjoy your flight. Linda lowered her head, too ashamed to respond. As Daniel started eating, a man from behind leaned forward. Hey brother. Just wanted to say, respect. You handled that better than most of us could have. Daniel gave a small nod. Thank you. Another passenger added, you're an example. Seriously. But Daniel suddenly felt a familiar weight in his chest. Praise was nice, but it wasn't the whole story. The truth was, being calm didn't come from strength alone. It came from years of learning to control pain, hide fear, and swallow things that should never have been said to him in the first place. He felt the memories rising, the battles he fought, the people he lost, the nights he stayed awake thinking about things he wished he could forget. But he pushed them down. Not now. Linda must have sensed the shift in his energy. She turned to him hesitantly. Those men you saved, were they your friends? Daniel paused, setting his fork down. His voice softened. All of them. Linda swallowed hard. And you almost died doing it? Daniel stared ahead, remembering flames, smoke, metal, screams, things he never talked about. Yes, he said quietly. But I would have done it again. Linda wiped a tear from her cheek. I'm sorry. I truly am. Daniel finally looked at her. His gaze wasn't angry this time. It was tired, but honest. Then show it. Not with words. With how you treat people after today. Linda nodded slowly. I will. The plane continued soaring through the clouds, the sky turning a deeper blue outside. The tension in the cabin began to fade. Some passengers put on headphones. Others opened books. A few still watched Daniel with admiration in their eyes. Then something unexpected happened. A small boy from row 3 walked up shyly, holding his mother's hand. He stood next to Daniel's seat and whispered, Mister, are you a real hero? Daniel smiled gently. No, buddy. I'm just someone who did what he had to do. The boy looked confused. But the captain said you saved everyone. Daniel nodded. I did my best. The boy's mother said softly, I wanted to say thank you. My husband serves too. What you did, it matters. Daniel's chest tightened. He nodded respectfully. Tell him to stay safe. She smiled and led the boy back to their seats. As they walked away, Linda watched them, tears glistening in her eyes. She whispered, almost to herself, I had no idea someone like you existed. Daniel stared out the window again. There are many, he said. You just don't always see them. Linda lowered her gaze, humbled beyond words. And as the plane flew smoothly at 35,000 feet, a strange peace settled over the cabin. The woman who tried to tear him down had learned a lesson she would carry forever. And the man she judged continued to show grace even when faced with prejudice. But the flight wasn't over yet. And neither was the story. The sky outside had turned a deep, peaceful blue, but inside the plane, emotions still moved like quiet storms. Daniel sat back in his seat, trying to let the calm settle inside him. He sipped a little water, hoping it would steady the heaviness in his chest. The applause was over, the cabin was quiet again, but his mind wasn't. He wished people would stop looking at him. Not because he was uncomfortable, but because he had never wanted attention. He didn't save lives to be thanked. He didn't serve to be celebrated. He did what he did because the man he used to be wouldn't let him walk away from danger. But today even he couldn't ignore the moment. A stranger had tried to embarrass him. And the world had answered back with respect. Linda sat next to him, her shoulders stiff, staring at her knees like a child waiting for punishment. She had replayed her own words 1,000 times already, each one uglier than the last. Every insult she'd thrown at Daniel felt like poison she had swallowed herself. She wanted to speak again, but she feared her voice would shake. She feared she might cry. She feared she didn't deserve forgiveness at all. The flight attendant returned quietly and placed a small packet of tissues in her lap. "You might need these, ma'am." Linda nodded silently, unable to respond. Her guilt felt endless. Daniel noticed, but didn't say anything. He wasn't going to comfort her, but he wasn't going to humiliate her either. That wasn't who he was. The cabin lights dimmed to evening mode. Soft orange glowed above their heads. Passengers settled in, some watching movies, others reading or sleeping. But Daniel couldn't rest. His mind drifted back to the military base, the sandstorms, the long nights listening for danger, the heavy silence after an explosion. He remembered every detail of the mission where he almost lost his life, and the men who owed theirs to him. He closed his eyes for a moment, the memory flickering like an old film reel. Then he felt movement beside him. Linda shifted, breathing shakily. "Mr. Harris, may I tell you something?" she whispered. Daniel opened his eyes. "If you need to." Linda swallowed hard. "I wasn't always this way." Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. "I used to be kind," she continued. "I used to treat everyone equally. But my ex-husband, he taught me to be suspicious, to judge people, to look down on anyone who didn't look successful." Daniel didn't reply. Linda forced herself to continue. "And I became someone I'm not proud of. Someone who sees danger where there isn't any. Someone who sees less, where there is more. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't stop myself." Her voice cracked. Today I saw my reflection for the first time. And I didn't like the person looking back." Daniel took a slow breath. "Then change," he said simply. "Being wrong once doesn't mean staying wrong forever." Linda blinked, surprised by his gentleness. "I don't deserve your kindness." Daniel looked her in the eyes. "Maybe not. But people don't become better because they deserve kindness. They become better because someone shows it anyway." Linda covered her mouth as tears finally escaped. It wasn't dramatic and it wasn't loud, just quiet, painful, honest tears. The woman who had started the trouble was no longer the loudest person in the room. Now she was the quietest. A few minutes later, the captain's voice came over the speakers again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be experiencing a short patch of turbulence. Please keep your seatbelts fastened." The plane shook gently. Some passengers gasped softly. Daniel didn't move, turbulence didn't scare him. But Linda gripped the armrests tightly. Daniel noticed. "You all right?" Linda nodded quickly. "Just nervous." "Don't be," he said calmly. "This part is normal." She breathed slowly, trying to follow his example. After a few minutes, the turbulence stopped. The cabin relaxed again. Daniel glanced out the window. The clouds glowed like silver waves under the moonlight. It was beautiful, peaceful, almost symbolic. Linda wiped her eyes again. "Mr. Harris, I can't change what I did, but I can change what I do next." Daniel nodded. "That's all anyone can do." She hesitated, then softly asked, Can we start over?" Daniel paused. Then he extended his hand. "Daniel," he said gently. Linda let out a shaky breath and took his hand. "Linda." And in that simple handshake something broke, not in a painful way but in a healing way. Like a wall that had cracked open to let light through. The very woman who tried to tear him down was now learning from him. And Daniel, the man she had judged unfairly, had given her the chance to rise from her mistake. The flight continued smoothly. But their story was far from finished. The cabin had settled into a calm, sleepy rhythm as the flight continued through the night sky. Soft overhead lights glowed like distant stars, and gentle music hummed quietly from the speakers. Most passengers had drifted into silence, some watching movies, others resting with their eyes closed. But Daniel and Linda sat wide awake, carrying the weight of everything that had happened. Daniel leaned back in his seat, breathing slowly, trying to steady the memories stirring inside him. He didn't want to think about old battles, old wounds, or old fears. He had spent years trying to leave them behind. Yet today, because of one woman's loud assumptions, he was forced to remember who he used to be, and who he still was. Linda watched him from the corner of her eye. She expected him to turn away, ignore her, or even resent her. But Daniel's calmness, his patience, his quiet strength, it confused her. It softened parts of her she didn't know were still alive. She wanted to speak, but she didn't want to break the peacefulness he was finally beginning to feel. After a long moment, she whispered, "Daniel, can I ask you something?" Daniel opened his eyes slowly. "If it's not about the past," he replied gently. "I'm tired of reliving it." Linda nodded. "No, it's about now. About this." She gestured subtly around them, the cabin, the seats, the moment. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What about it? Linda swallowed. Why didn't you yell at me? Why didn't you defend yourself earlier? Why did you let me treat you like that without saying anything? Daniel looked forward, thinking. Because I've learned something over the years. What? She asked softly. That not every battle is worth fighting. And not every insult deserves fire in return. Linda blinked slowly. But, you had every right to be angry. Daniel nodded. Maybe. But being right doesn't always mean being loud. He paused, then added quietly, sometimes silence protects you more. Linda lowered her gaze. His words sunk deep into her. She spoke again carefully. Do you deal with this often? People like me? Daniel didn't smile, but a sad softness appeared in his eyes. More times than I can count. Linda winced. I'm sorry. Truly. I don't expect forgiveness. She sighed. I never thought about how much harm my assumptions could cause. Most people don't, Daniel replied. They assume once, and decide a whole story in their mind. Linda nodded slowly. And I created a story about you before you said a single word. Exactly, Daniel said. The turbulence from earlier had passed, but inside Linda, something still shook. She whispered, thank you, for giving me a chance to see who you really are. Daniel's reply came gently. You're seeing who I've always been. I didn't change. Your perspective did. Linda wiped her eyes again. She had cried more in one flight than she had in years. But this time the tears felt necessary. Feeling honest. A few seats ahead, a little boy peeked over his seat, watching Daniel curiously. When Daniel noticed him, the boy waved shyly. Daniel lifted a hand in return. The boy grinned and whispered to his father, loud enough for Daniel to hear. It's the hero man. Daniel chuckled softly. Linda felt her heart clench. A child saw what she refused to see earlier, a good man. A humble man. A hero. But then the captain made another announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing in approximately 1 hour. Cabin crew, please prepare for descent. Passengers stretched. Some woke up. But the energy in first class was different. Gentler, warmer, more aware. Linda took a slow breath. Daniel, after everything, I want to ask you something important. Daniel turned toward her, curious but calm. What is it? She hesitated. Would you allow me to make things right? Not with words, but with actions. I want to change. I need to change. Daniel studied her for a moment. Her eyes weren't defensive anymore. They weren't hard or judgmental. They were human, raw, vulnerable, sincere. He nodded slightly. Change starts when you choose to see people, not stereotypes. Linda's voice cracked. Then I want to start today. Daniel offered her a gentle nod. That's a good beginning. Just then the flight attendant passed by, giving Daniel another respectful smile, and giving Linda a slow, meaningful one, as if checking whether she had truly learned her lesson. Linda accepted it quietly. Outside, the city lights began to appear far below, twinkling like tiny stars scattered across the earth. Daniel looked out the window, letting the glow reflect in his eyes. Beside him, Linda watched the same view, but with a very different heart than when the flight began. She whispered, "This view feels different tonight." Daniel answered softly, "Growth usually changes how things look." Linda nodded. And for the first time she understood. The world didn't change around her. She changed inside. As the plane began its slow descent, the seatbelt signs blinked on, and the cabin filled with gentle instructions. Passengers adjusted their seats, stretched their arms, and packed away headphones. But in the first-class cabin, something deeper was happening. Something quieter but far more meaningful. Daniel watched the city lights grow clearer through the window. Little dots of gold, stretching for miles. They reminded him of the nights overseas when he stared at distant lights and wondered if he would ever make it home. Now he was here, in a place far safer. Yet tonight had shown him that wounds could come from anywhere. Beside him, Linda sat up straight, breathing slowly as if preparing herself for a moment she could no longer avoid. Her heart pounded. Not from fear of landing, but from the weight of everything she had learned in a few hours. She turned slightly toward Daniel. "I don't know if I deserve to say this, but thank you." Daniel looked at her calmly. "For what?" "For not treating me the way I treated you," she whispered. Daniel exhaled softly. Anger only grows anger. Peace grows peace. Linda blinked, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. "I never realized how powerful assumptions can be. How fast they can hurt someone." "Most people don't," Daniel replied. "We all carry stories. We just don't always share them." Linda nodded, her voice trembling. I saw your clothes, your backpack, and I built a whole story about you that was wrong. So wrong. And now? Daniel asked quietly. Now, she said with a heavy breath, I see a man who risked everything for others. A man who deserved respect long before anyone knew who he was. Daniel looked down at his hands, feeling the sincerity in her tone. He wasn't someone who collected apologies, but hers felt different, like a weight she had carried for years and finally released. The plane dipped lower. A baby cried somewhere in the back. The cabin lights brightened slightly. A little boy from row 3 appeared again, peeking through the gap in the seats. He waved at Daniel shyly. Bye, hero man. Daniel smiled. Bye, buddy. Be good. The boy's mother whispered, thank you again, and guided him back to his seat. Linda watched the moment quietly. Her chest tightened. She had judged a man children saw as a hero. Minutes later, the wheels touched the runway. A soft bump traveled through the cabin. The plane slowed, engines humming deeply. A few passengers applauded softly. When the plane came to a halt, the captain made one final announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying with us. And a special thank you to Sergeant Harris for being on board. It was an honor. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, humbled. He never expected recognition. But today he accepted it quietly, not for ego but because it reminded him that courage mattered. Linda let out a shaky breath. I'll never forget this day. Daniel nodded. That's good. Some lessons are meant to stay. People began standing, collecting their bags. But instead of rushing to exit like usual, several first-class passengers waited, not wanting to push ahead of Daniel. Some even nodded respectfully as they passed. An older man paused beside Daniel. My son serves, he said quietly. Thank you for what you've done, for all of us. Daniel nodded. Take care of him. One by one, passengers expressed gratitude. Simple words. Soft smiles. Kind eyes. And each one carved away a little more of the pain Daniel had carried for years. Finally, only Daniel and Linda remained seated. She looked at him with a vulnerable honesty she had never shown anyone before. Daniel, before we leave, I need to say something properly. He waited, patient as always. She swallowed. I know my apology doesn't erase anything. But I promise you, I will never look at another person the same way again. You changed me. Not by force. Not by anger. Just by being who you are. Daniel studied her face. No arrogance, no pride, no walls. Only truth. He gave a small nod. Then the lesson was worth it. Linda bit her lip, tears returning. I wish I could undo how I treated you. You can't, Daniel said gently. But you can do better. She nodded. I will. Daniel stood slowly, reaching for his backpack. Linda stood too. As they walked down the aisle, Linda kept her head low, humbled by every respectful glance Daniel received. And each time someone thanked him, her heart tightened, not with jealousy but with gratitude. At the plane's exit, the captain stood waiting. He shook Daniel's hand firmly. Take care, Sergeant. You're always welcome on any flight I command. Thank you, Captain, Daniel said softly. As Daniel stepped into the jet bridge, Linda paused behind him. Before he walked away, she whispered, Goodbye, and thank you for giving me a reason to become better. Daniel turned slightly, offering her a quiet nod. Goodbye, Linda. And with that, he walked into the terminal, a simple man with a quiet past, leaving behind a story that had changed strangers, changed a cabin, changed a heart. He didn't need applause. He didn't need recognition. He only needed the truth to be seen. And today, everyone saw it.